Hey everybody, Matt from 90th percentile.ca here. For access to more study notes, practice questions, mock exams, and end of chapter question videos, visit 90th percentile.ca and sign up for your free trial today. Link below in the description. First learning module in econ is topics in demand and supply analysis. Once again, similar to some of the other intro modules in a topic, it's laying the foundation for some of the more complex econ modules that we're going to get to shortly. But regardless, we're going to spend some time on it, make sure we understand the key topics. And those two topics are one, elasticity, which put really simply is just a calculation or a metric that is used to determine how sensitive one variable is to the change in another variable. So the three types of elasticity we're going to go over are price elasticity, income elasticity, cross price elasticity. And basically what we're measuring is how the quantity demanded of a certain good changes based on its own price changing, someone's income changing, or the price of a different good changing. From there, we're also going to talk about revenue and cost structures in perfect competition. So perfect competition is just, it's assumed to be a certain type of market or a market structure with a bunch of firms that are all offering the exact same good. And due to that, and the fact that there's low barriers or no barriers to entry, they don't these firms don't have any pricing power. Like imagine a market where there's like 2,000 companies selling the exact same thing. Um, the individual company in that market isn't really going to have much sway over setting prices or really determining any characteristics of the market. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to outline the relationship between marginal cost, average variable cost, average fixed cost, and average total cost, which is of course a sum of fixed cost and variable cost. And we're going to have some graphs which display these relationships and how these curves impact business decisions in a perfectly competitive market, such as what quantity they produce to maximize your profit, at which point do they shut down because their operations are no longer economical or feasible, and at what point are they going to break even. So with that, let's get into the questions. The demand for membership at a local health club is determined by the following equation, where the quantity demanded equals 400 minus 5 times the price. And yeah, where Q is the number of health club members, P is the price. If the price of the health club membership is $35, price elasticity of demand is closest to which one? So price elasticity can be calculated using either one of these formulas. They're both the same thing. So the first one is the percentage change in the quantity divided by the percentage change in price. Or you could just take the change, not the percentage change, just the change in quantity over the change in price times P over Q. So when you're actually given a demand equation like this term right here is actually the slope of the line, so the -5. So we already have that. So we can just go ahead and solve, but we need P and Q. P is given in the question, so we have P is 35. Q, we need to sub in the P into this equation to find Q. So Q is 400 minus 5 times 35, which is 175. So 400 minus 175 is 225. And now we can go ahead and solve for price elasticity. So once again, we have this term is the -5 from the equation. So -5 times price is 35 given in the question, and 225 quantity, which we just solved for. And if we do that, we get -0.8. So A is our answer. The market demand function for four-year private universities is given by the equation here. Looks like we have quantity demanded of private universities is 84 minus 3.1. This is the price of private plus 0.8 income plus 0.8 the cost of public universities. So the quantity demanded of private universities depends on three different factors here. assume that the price of private is 38, so PR is 38, I is 100, and PU is 18. And in this question, the price elasticity of demand for private universities is one of these. So same kind of question. We have change in Q. This is what price elasticity is equal to. Change in Q over change in P times P over Q. We're going to use this equation because we have the demand function here, so it's easy to just know what this part of the formula is. But we're going to have to solve for Q given these inputs. So when you have multiple inputs here, you actually just have to sub them all in and then solve for the quantity demanded of private universities. So it's going to be Q equals 84 minus 3.1. The price of private is 38 plus 0.8. Income is 100 plus 0.9 public, which is 18. You run this out and you get the quantity demanded of 62.4. So now we have everything we need for the elasticity formula, and we can bring this over here. And this term is the slope in front of the private. So it's going to be negative 3.1 times the price, which was 38, over the quantity that we just solved for, which is 62.4. And the answer is negative 1.9. So it's B. Next question, the income elasticity of demand for private universities is closest to. So here we're actually worried about income instead of the price of private universities. Same kind of concept. The formula for elasticity is still the same, where it's Q or delta Q over delta, here it's income instead of P, times I over Q. We already solved for this Q value in the previous question, like none of these inputs have changed from question 3 to question 4. So Q is 62.4, and now we can sub in to this formula pretty easily. We have the delta Q over delta I being equal to this 0.8 times income is 100 over 62.4. And our answer is 1.3, C. Same data set here, just two more questions. Here we got to find the cross price elasticity of demand for private universities with respect to the price of public universities. Same kind of concept. Now we're just, instead of doing income elasticity, we're just worried about the price of public. So the formula is still the same, delta change in Q over delta change. Here it's the change in price of public times the price of public over the quantity demanded. Quantity demanded we already solved, we've seen it a couple times, is 62.4. And now this term here is going to be the 0.9 from the demand function, and we can solve pretty easily. So 0.9 times the price of public is 18 over 62.4, and this is 0.3. So our answer is A. And then for 6, really quick, if the cross price elasticity between two goods is negative, the two goods are classified as normal, substitutes, or complements. So the cross price elasticity between two goods is negative. It might be a bit confusing that it's asking for negative, but negative elasticity is really when it's less than 1. And the reason for that is with the cross price elasticity of 0.3, it's basically assumed that if, the price for public universities falls, then the demand for both quantity demanded for both private plus the quantity demanded for public will both increase because they are complement goods, not substitutes. They're complements to each other. So the answer is going to be C. One other way to think of it, really easy, would be to think of two goods. You could have like printers and then printer ink. Um, if the price for printers increases, then the demand for printers will decrease, and as a result of that, the demand for ink will also increase. So printers and ink would be complements. This one we can do quickly, but I think it's something we should definitely clear up just to make sure we're all on the same page with elasticity before we move on. If the income elasticity of demand for a product is negative 0.6, what does that mean? It's the same interpretation for both the income elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, all of that. All of this is saying is that a 1% increase in income will lead to a negative 0.6 times 1%, or a 0.6% decrease in demand. So the answer is B. In the case of a normal good with a decrease in its own price, which of the following statements is most likely true? Both the substitution and income effects lead to an increase in the quantity purchased. The substitution effect leads to an increase in the quantity purchased while the income effect has no impact. Or C, the substitution effect leads to an increase in the quantity purchased while the income effect leads to a decrease. So a normal good is one that has a income elasticity greater than 1, which all of this means is as your income increases, the quantity demanded of a certain good also increases. So this is a normal good. While for a inferior good, the income elasticity is less than 1. And all of this means, once again, as your income increases, the quantity demanded of a good decreases. So in the case of a normal good, there's two effects that we have highlighted here, right? So the substitution and the income effect. Substitution effect simply states that as the price of something decreases, the quantity will increase, quantity demanded will increase, which makes sense. That's the case across pretty much everything. But in the case of the income effect, for normal good, the fact that your income is increasing leads to a greater quantity demanded, also leads to you demanding more of the same good. So there's like, kind of think of it as two effects. You have the substitution effect of the price of the good decreasing, so you demand more. And you have your income increasing combined with the price decreasing, so you have more purchasing power, and then overall you're gonna demand more. So the answer is gonna be A here. For an inferior good, not part of the question, but a decrease in price of the good would increase quantity demanded, but because income elasticity is less than 1, the income effect will work in the opposite way, which will result in a decrease in the quantity demanded. The net change is, depends on what the actual elasticities are, but the thing to note is for inferior, the substitution and inferior effects work in the opposite direction. And like a quick example of an inferior good, the easiest example is like, the no-name products at the grocery stores, like the no-name veggies or whatever. As soon as it's typically the case where as people start making more money, you might start shopping at, you know, the Whole Foods and the more expensive grocery shops. So as you get more and more money, the demand for those no-name products decreases. The marketing director for a Swiss specialty equipment manufacturer estimates the firm can sell 200 units and earn total revenue of 500K. So 500K at 200 quantity. However, if 250 units are sold, the revenue will be 600K. So 600K at 250 quantity. The marginal revenue per unit associated with marketing 250 units instead of 200 units is close as 2. Well, it's just going to be the change in revenue over change in quantity. So it's going to be the 100K over 50, which is 2,000. Before we get on to the next question, just wanted to quickly bring up this chart here and kind of explain it. It's a pretty common series of lines and charts that connect revenue and cost for a firm that is in perfect competition. So perfect competition, basically, if you want to think of it, it's essentially a market where there's a bunch of firms and they're pretty much offering the same product, and there's low or non-existent barriers to entry. So in a market such as this, let's say you have like 5,000 companies selling the exact same product. The key distinguishing factor with perfect competition is that the firms must take the price as given, and they do not have any say over what the price in the market is. This is a little bit different from an imperfect market structure, which is something like a monopoly or oligopoly, where there's a couple firms, and you know, in the extreme case of a monopoly, they'll be the only ones selling the product, so they decide the price in the market. But here, once again, before we get to the question, just wanted to quickly highlight a couple curves here, because these are some pretty important concepts. Here we have the short run marginal cost curve, we have the average total cost curve, and the average variable cost curve. So average total cost, of course, is just going to be your total cost over your total quantity produced, and then average variable cost is the same thing, just with the variable cost on top. One key thing to note about the slopes of these lines is that the short run marginal cost curve will start off decreasing, so it's downward sloping at first, and then at a certain point in time, right around here, the firm is assumed to experience diminishing marginal returns, and from this point, the marginal cost is going to start to increase for producing one more unit. And there's two key points to notice here. One is here, and one is here. This first point down here where the short run marginal cost curve intersects the average variable cost curve. As soon as the short run marginal cost, or the cost of producing one more unit, is greater than the average variable cost, then after this point, average variable cost can be upward sloping. And it's the exact same concept for average total cost. And due to that, the short run marginal cost curve will always intersect the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve at their minimum. So you can see that these points are the very minimum on the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve. And the difference, of course, between these two lines, average variable cost and total cost, is going to be your average fixed costs. So now going back to the question, a profit maximum is least likely to occur when, start from the bottom, the difference between total revenue and total cost is maximized. So that, is the definition of a profit maximum, so that's not the answer. For B, we have marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You can see if we look at this graph here, so we have marginal revenue, which is your price that is set in the market. And then we have marginal cost right here. So the intersection between these points is right here. And the optimal, let's assume that the optimal quantity for the firm to produce is always where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And you can actually see, if you look at this chart, the difference between this line, the marginal revenue line, and the average total cost, this little area right here, is actually the firm's profit. Because recall, once again, in a perfectly competitive market, the price is fixed. So basically this marginal revenue is going to be the same across every single unit that the firm has ever sold. So another way to kind of think of it, the way I like to think of it, this is like total revenue, kind of, not really, but it's the per unit measure is the same as this right here, the average total cost. This could be total cost. Might be a easier way to think about it. And you can see the difference right here is actually a profit for the firm. So this is not the answer either. And then A, average total cost is minimized. This is the least likely answer for a profit maximum because we have average total cost being minimized, but we don't know anything about marginal revenue or revenue in general. It could be, like coming back to this graph, it could be the case where if we're looking at the average total cost line, the minimum is right here, but the price set in the market could be, you know, all the way down here. So with this answer, we don't know anything about revenue, so this is doesn't tell us enough to ensure a profit maximum. So now we're going to be talking about shutdown and break-even points. It's a little bit different than profit maximization. The key for profit maximization, remember, is that marginal revenue goes marginal cost. Firm will produce at this level of output. But going forward to the shutdown points and break-even points, it's a little bit different. I have two different graphs here. We'll get to them in a second. But one thing I really quickly wanted to note is that this learning module and econ in general differentiates between the optimal decisions that firms make in the short term versus the long term. And all of these decisions are going to depend on the relationship of revenue and cost down here. But the key thing to note is that in the short term, your fixed costs are, well, fixed. Like the firm has no say over whether or not to increase or decrease its fixed costs, which kind of makes sense. Like if you want to factor in you're producing a bunch of stuff, it's going to take some time to either sell off the factory or completely stop operations. You're gonna still have some fixed costs for some period of time, whereas in the long term, fixed costs are variable. So the firm has the long-term decision to completely shut down operations and all of that. So coming down to over here, we have three different revenue and cost relationships, and the decision on whether or not to shut down or stay in the market will depend on these relationships. So first one, we have total revenue is equal to total cost. In the short term, it's kind of a weird thing where total revenue equals total cost is technically no profit. Um, Not very intuitive. I mean, like when I first think this, okay, total revenue is equal to total cost. Like, why are we even bothering running a business if we're not making any money? Um, but the way econ thinks of it is that, okay, we're not losing any money. So in the short term and the long term, we're going to stay in the market. Oh, sorry. We're going to stay for both in the short term and the long term. Going down to the second point, we have total revenue is equal to total variable cost, but is less than total cost. And this total cost is going to include your fixed cost, right? So in the short term, we're actually going to stay because the revenue that we're getting is at least equal to our variable costs. And then our total cost, which include fixed costs, is not under our control. So we don't have any other choice here but to stay. While in the long term, given that we're losing money actually because our total revenue is less than all of our costs, we're going to exit because now we can actually shut down our factories and all of that. Last one, total revenue is less than total variable costs. In the short term, you're not going to bother because you're actually losing money on your variable cost and your fixed cost. So here you're going to exit, and in the long term, you are going to exit as well. So now we also have these graphs on the right hand side. This one is a new one that I brought over for this question. This one down here is the one from the previous question. Only difference between the two here, you can see that we have the average total cost curve up here meeting with marginal revenue at the minimum point, whereas down here, the average total cost is below marginal revenue on the minimum point. So we actually have a profit here, whereas we don't right here. The number one chart up here, so the one above, is mainly going to be used to visualize some question 29 here. This one I just wanted to bring over just to use as comparison, but basically the only difference is that the price and average total costs are assumed to be different across these firms. Like this firm could have higher fixed costs, for example. So coming to 28, the short-term shutdown point of production for a firm operating under Perfect competition will most likely occur when price is equal to average total cost. So once again, perfect competition. So your price is always going to be marginal revenue. The way like, this is kind of worded a little bit weird. The way I like to think about it is that price, like both of these measures right now are per output, so price per output and average total cost per output. But if you just like not literally, but multiply both of them by output, you could reword this as price, which is total revenue, is equal to average total cost, which is total cost. So we know from down here that we're not going to shut down when total revenue equals total cost because we're at least not losing money. For B, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. You're never going to shut down here. Like you can see even from this chart, marginal revenue is this horizontal line. Marginal cost is right here. So even though the average total cost curve is, you know, up here, and this is like one of the most conservative examples where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, but your average total cost curve intersects at the same point. Here you still wouldn't be losing money, so you're not going to shut down. Whereas for C, marginal revenue is equal to average variable costs, and you can see from once again from the graph, you can kind of logically think about it, but like also if you look at the graph here, if marginal revenue equals average variable cost, that'd be this point right here, and we are losing cash. Draw it a little bit better, but we're losing cash from this area, so the difference between the marginal revenue and the average total cost. So this is when the firm would shut down. And then 29, under conditions of perfect competition, a company will break even when market price is equal to the minimum point of the, went over this a little bit earlier, but if your market price or your marginal revenue is equal to your average total cost, then you're going to be break even, and that's exactly what this point is right here. Here we have two more questions related to staying in the market or shutting down. These are worded a little bit more simply, and we won't have the graph, so we can go through these pretty quick. First one, a company has total variable cost of 4 million and fixed cost of 3 million. Based on this information, the company will stay in the market in the long term if total revenue is at least, so in the long term, remember in the long term, we need at least our revenue to equal all of our costs, so our variable and our fixed. So we have variable of 4, fixed of 3, so we're going to need revenue of at least 7 million to stay in the market. Otherwise, we're going to shut down. Next, when total revenue is greater than total variable cost, so total revenue greater than total variable cost, but less than total cost. In the short term, a firm will most likely, remember, they're going to stay in the market because at least their revenue is greater than their variable cost, which they control, but the total cost, which is comprised of fixed costs, we do not control. So in the short term, this doesn't matter to us as long as we're recuperating our variable costs. Last question here, and we have a company's exercising economies of scale when cost per unit increases as output increases. That's incorrect. Cost per unit will decrease as output increases. So this is wrong. B, it is operating at a point on the long run average cost curve where the slope is negative. Keep that in mind for a second. And C, it is operating beyond the minimum point on the long run average total cost curve. So here I have, these are the last two charts that we'll see. We have two separate graphs here. First one represents economies of scale. Second is diseconomies of scale. And we'll break these down really quickly. So on the top one, we have 4 separate short run average total cost curves. 1, 2, 3, 4. And basically what this is the same average total cost curve that we saw on the previous question, but here we're assumed to have 4 different instances or 4 different makeups of the same company. So like, let's say we have a manufacturing company, they're producing whatever, tires, doesn't matter. They have a factory, and here they have like one factory. But in a future state, they might have 2 factories, and then 3 factories, and then 4 factories. So due to that, their average total cost across adding new factories is going to decrease because they're going to have more economies of scale. They're going to be able to produce goods at cheaper prices per unit. So the minimum point along all of these short run curves is known as the long run average cost curve. So in the long run, if the firm continues on this trajectory and they keep, adding more factories, it might have like a curve 5 here. The long run average cost is going to keep going down. And because the average cost is going down as the units are increasing, it is experiencing economies of scale. So the answer here is going to be B. It is operating at a point with a long run average cost curve on the long run average cost curve where the slope is negative. So here it's sloping negative, so cost is going down. On the flip side of that, you might have, different cost makeups. So like the shape of the curves here is just for a company that, can't produce as efficiently. And here they're actually increasing their cost per unit as they keep expanding. So this would be diseconomies of scale, which is actually what we had in A right here. And then if we were to go back to C, this is saying the firm is operating beyond the minimum point on the long run average total cost curve. So all this means is that it's operating somewhere over here. It could be like up here somewhere. And in that case, we don't really know if the long run average cost curve can be downward sloping. It could be like up here. It could go up to like here. So if they're not producing on the downward slope, then we can't confirm if they have economies of scale or not. So your answer is B.